Ever feel like you're on like a mental battlefield, you know, bombarded by deadlines and expectations and that nagging feeling that you should be doing more?
Mm-hmm.
Well, today's deep dive is going to take us back in time, way, way back to ancient India,
Okay.
and a text that's surprisingly relevant to our modern struggles, the Bhagavad Gita. We'll be
Interesting.
exploring its insights on detachment and how, in a spiritual sense, nothing really matters. We're using this English translation as our guide.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? This
yeah,
idea that letting go
right.
can lead to a greater sense of peace and purpose.
Exactly. So for those unfamiliar, the Gita is part of this epic Indian poem, the Mahabharata.
Okay.
It's essentially a dialogue between a warrior named Arjuna and his charioteer, Krishna, who also happens to be an incarnation of God.
Wow.
Arjuna is facing a serious dilemma, to fight a war against his own family or walk away. And Krishna's advice isn't just about winning battles, it's about navigating the complexities of life itself.
And what's incredible is that the Gita's wisdom, while rooted in ancient philosophy, speaks directly to the mental health challenges many of us face today. Stress, anxiety, that feeling of being overwhelmed by it all.
Okay, so let's dive into this idea of detachment.
Okay.
Because when we hear nothing really matters,
Yeah.
it's easy to misinterpret that as nihilism or an excuse to check out of life completely.
Yeah.
But that's not what the Gita is advocating, right?
Not at all.
Okay.
Detachment, as the Gita explains it, isn't about apathy or indifference.
Yeah.
It's more about shifting our perspective.
Okay.
Imagine a tortoise retreating into its shell.
Uh-huh.
It's still present, but protected from external disturbances. Detachment helps us cultivate that kind of inner sanctuary amidst the chaos of the world.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So how do we actually apply this tortoise strategy to our modern lives? Especially when we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to strive for more, achieve more, be more.
Well, the Gita reminds us that everything in the material world is temporary. Think about it. Possessions break, trends fade, even our bodies change over time.
Yeah.
Attaching our happiness to these fleeting things inevitably leads to disappointment and suffering.
So it's not that our goals or desires are inherently wrong.
Right.
It's about where we place our sense of self-worth and fulfillment.
Precisely. The Gita encourages us to find a deeper sense of peace and stability in something more enduring, our connection to the divine, that spark of consciousness that exists beyond the physical realm.
That makes sense, but it also sounds incredibly challenging. How do we reconcile this spiritual perspective with the demands of daily life? We still have jobs to do, bills to pay, relationships to navigate.
And the Gita addresses this, too, through the concept of karma yoga, which is often translated as selfless action,
Okay.
or action without attachment to the results. The Gita teaches that we have control over our actions, but not necessarily the outcomes.
So it's about focusing on doing our best without getting fixated on specific results.
Yes. Let's say you're working on a project at work. Instead of obsessing over getting a promotion, karma yoga encourages you to focus on doing the task to the best of your ability for its own sake.
Huh.
This practice helps reduce anxiety because you're releasing the need to control every outcome.
That sounds like a powerful way to approach work, especially in a high-pressure environment. But how does this concept of action without attachment apply to other areas of life, like relationships?
Let's say you're putting effort into a friendship. You enjoy spending time with this person, you value their company. But sometimes friendships naturally drift apart, and it's not always something you can control. Karma yoga would suggest that you cherish the moments you have, you invest in the relationship authentically, but you also accept that its course might change over time. You release the need to control the outcome.
That's a helpful way to reframe it. So instead of clinging tightly to how we want things to be, we're shifting our focus to the quality of our actions and intentions.
Exactly. And this shift in perspective can be incredibly freeing because it releases us from the burden of needing to orchestrate every detail of our lives.
This concept of not being the doer really makes you think, doesn't it? It almost challenges our entire sense of self. But before we get too deep into that, maybe we could unpack it a bit more after a short break.
I think that's a great place to pause. There's a lot to ponder here, and we've only just scratched the surface. So we were just discussing this radical idea from the Gita
Yeah.
that we're not truly the doers of our actions.
Right.
It's a concept that can feel pretty counterintuitive at first.
It definitely goes against our usual way of thinking. Most of us are raised to believe that we're in control, that we're the captains of our own ships, so to speak.
Yeah.
But the Gita seems to suggest something quite different.
That's right. It points to the idea that there are countless forces at play in the universe, influencing our actions and shaping our experiences.
Okay.
Think of a leaf being tossed about by the wind.
Okay.
It might appear to be moving randomly, but its path is ultimately determined by forces beyond its control.
So are we saying that free will is an illusion? That we're just puppets being controlled by fate?
It's not quite as black and white as that.
Yeah.
The Gita recognizes our capacity to make choices, but it also acknowledges that the outcomes of those choices are often beyond our grasp.
Ugh.
We might plant the seed, but we can't control the weather or guarantee that it will grow.
So it's more about recognizing the limits of our control and accepting that some things are simply beyond our influence.
Yes, and this understanding can be incredibly liberating.
Okay.
When we release the need to micromanage every aspect of our lives,
Right.
we open ourselves up to a greater sense of peace and acceptance.
I can see how that would apply to situations that are clearly outside our control, like the weather or traffic.
hmm
But what about things that we feel we have more agency over, like our careers or relationships?
Think of it this way. You might put in the effort to study for a test
Uh-huh.
or prepare for a job interview, but you can't guarantee you'll get the grade you want or land the job. There are always external factors at play,
Yeah.
like the difficulty of the test, the other candidates, the whims of the hiring manager.
It reminds me of that saying, man plans, God laughs.
Exactly. And the Gita isn't saying we shouldn't strive for our goals or put in the effort.
Right.
It's more about detaching from the need to control the outcome.
Okay.
We focus on playing our part to the best of our ability, but we surrender the rest to a higher power.
This idea of surrendering control can feel a bit scary, though. It's like stepping off a cliff and trusting that you'll somehow land safely.
It can definitely be a leap of faith, but the Gita offers us a profound reassurance. It reminds us that we're not alone in this journey.
Right.
There's a divine intelligence at work in the universe, guiding and supporting us even when we can't see it.
So it's about trusting in something bigger than ourselves, even when things feel uncertain or chaotic.
Yes, and that trust can be a powerful antidote to anxiety and fear. When we recognize that we're part of something much vaster than our individual lives,
Right.
our problems tend to feel smaller, more manageable.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like realizing that even though we're each a tiny drop in the ocean, we're all connected to this vast, infinite source of peace and wisdom.
Exactly. And the Gita gives us practical tools for accessing that inner peace, even amidst the turbulence of life. We've already talked about karma yoga, the practice of selfless action,
Right.
but there are other techniques like meditation and mindfulness that can
Ah.
help us cultivate a greater sense of detachment and equanimity.
Those practices are often touted as stress relievers, but I'm starting to see how they connect to this deeper philosophical framework the Gita presents.
Absolutely. Meditation, for example, helps us train our minds to become less reactive to external stimuli.
Okay.
It's like building a mental muscle that allows us to observe our thoughts and emotions without getting swept away by them.
So instead of being tossed about by the waves of our thoughts and feelings, we're learning to ride them with more skill and grace.
Precisely. And this ability to detach from the constant chatter of our minds can be incredibly helpful in managing stress and reducing overthinking.
It sounds like the Gita is offering a roadmap for navigating not just our external world, but also the inner landscape of our minds.
It is. And the more we understand these teachings, the more we realize that true peace and happiness aren't found in external circumstances, but in cultivating a deep sense of connection to the divine within ourselves.
Mhm.
It's about remembering that in a spiritual sense, nothing really matters except for that essential core of our being.
It's a profound shift in perspective, and I'm curious to explore some more practical examples of how we can integrate these ideas into our everyday lives. But before we do, maybe we could take a moment to recap what we've covered so far.
That sounds like a great idea.
Right.
Let's take a breath and then delve a little deeper into how the Gita can be a guide for navigating the ups and downs of modern life.
Okay, so we've been talking about some pretty deep concepts from the Bhagavad Gita, detachment, karma yoga, the idea that we're not really the doers of our actions.
Right.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but I think what's so compelling about the Gita is that it doesn't just present these ideas as abstract philosophies. Yeah.
It offers practical guidance on how to apply them to the challenges of everyday life.
That's what I'm really curious about. How do we actually translate these ancient teachings into tangible actions and mindsets that can help us navigate the stresses of modern life?
Well, one of the key takeaways from the Gita is the importance of cultivating inner peace,
Okay.
And it emphasizes that true peace doesn't depend on external circumstances. It's not about having a perfect life free from problems or challenges.
So it's not about eliminating stress altogether,
Right.
but rather changing our relationship to it.
That's a great way to put it. The Gita teaches us that we can find a sense of calm and equanimity even amidst the ups and downs of life. It's about developing that inner sanctuary, that place of stillness within ourselves that remains untouched by the storms raging around us.
And you mentioned earlier that practices like meditation and mindfulness can help us cultivate that inner sanctuary. Exactly. These practices help us train our minds to become less reactive to the constant stream of thoughts and emotions that can create stress and anxiety. Think of it like building a mental muscle.
hmm
The more we practice observing our thoughts without judgment, the less likely we are to get swept away by them.
So instead of getting caught up in the drama of our thoughts, we're learning to create some distance, to see them as passing clouds in the vast sky of our consciousness.
Yes. And that shift in perspective can be incredibly empowering. It allows us to choose how we respond to challenges rather than reacting impulsively or getting stuck in negative thought patterns.
The Gita also talks about the importance of sense control, right?
It does. It uses the analogy of a charioteer trying to control unruly horses.
Okay.
Our senses are constantly bombarded with stimuli, sights, sounds, tastes, desires, pulling us in different directions. The Gita teaches us that we need to develop the discipline to rein in our senses, to become more mindful of what we allow into our minds and hearts.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure or living an austere life. It's about finding a healthy balance, a sense of moderation.
Precisely. It's about making conscious choices that align with our values and our well-being, rather than being swept away by every passing impulse or temptation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like learning to be the discerning curator of our own mental and emotional experiences.
Exactly. And this practice of sense control can have profound benefits for our mental health. When we're less reactive to external stimuli, we naturally feel calmer and more centered.
This whole conversation has really highlighted how interconnected our mental and spiritual well-being are. It's not about compartmentalizing these aspects of ourselves, but recognizing that they influence each other deeply.
Absolutely. And the Gita provides a beautiful framework for understanding that interconnectedness. It reminds us that we're not just isolated individuals struggling to make sense of the world. We're part of something much larger, something divine and eternal.
And that realization can be incredibly comforting, especially in times of stress or uncertainty. It's like remembering that even when the waves are crashing around us, there's a deep, still ocean beneath the surface.
That's a beautiful analogy. And the Gita encourages us to dive into that ocean, to explore the depths of our own consciousness, and connect with the source of peace and wisdom that resides within each of us.
It sounds like the Gita is offering us not just a philosophy, but a way of life, a path to greater peace, purpose, and connection. It's been an incredibly insightful exploration, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of my own personal deep dive into these teachings.
I think that's the beauty of the Gita. It's a text that we can keep revisiting throughout our lives, finding new layers of meaning and inspiration each time. And I encourage all our listeners to embark on their own journeys of discovery with this timeless wisdom as their guide.
So for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the complexities of modern life, the Gita offers a powerful invitation to step back, reconnect with your inner compass, and embrace the journey of self-discovery with courage and grace. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Bhagavad Gita.